You are making a decision today, not a dramatic decision, not a decision you will mark on a calendar or discuss with anyone. A quiet, structural decision made in how you allocate the next available hour, the next available dollar, the next available unit of attention. And that decision, repeated daily across months and years, determines with near mathematical certainty whether you accumulate wealth that compounds independently or remain permanently inside a system that was designed to extract your labor at the lowest price you will accept. Most people never name this decision. They experience it as routine, as default behavior, as simply living their life. They do not recognize it as the variable that separates the two entirely different financial futures available to them. This is what the decision is, why it matters structurally, and how to begin making it differently. The decision is not about discipline. This is the first thing that must be clarified before anything else can be understood clearly. The conversation around wealth building is saturated with the language of discipline, willpower, sacrifice, delayed gratification. These are not wrong exactly, but they describe the wrong variable. Discipline without structural understanding is effort expended inside a system that is designed to neutralize it. The person who saves 20% of their salary with great discipline and deposits it into a low-yield savings account is disciplined. They are also, in real terms, losing purchasing power every year while calling it financial responsibility. Discipline applied to the wrong structure produces the wrong outcome regardless of how consistently it is applied. The decision that builds wealth is not primarily a decision about how hard you work. It is a decision about what category of asset you are building. Machiavelli wrote that the prince who wishes to hold his dominion securely must understand not only what is happening in front of him, but the structural logic that determines what will happen next. Because the person who reacts only to visible events is always one step behind the forces that are actually moving the world. He applied this principle to political power. The same principle governs financial accumulation with identical precision. What is happening in front of most people is their job, their salary, their monthly expenses, their retirement account balance. The structural logic operating underneath those visible facts is something they were never taught to see. The daily decision that builds wealth requires seeing both levels simultaneously. Not just the surface event, but the structural logic that makes that event's outcome inevitable. Consider time. Every financial strategy available to a human being is, at its foundation, a strategy about time. Not about how much time you spend working, though that matters at the margins. About whether time is working for you or being consumed by you. The employment model, the dominant financial strategy for the majority of the population, requires your time as the primary input. Remove the time, the income stops. This is not a criticism of employment as a category. It is a description of its structural mechanics. An employment income is a flow, not a structure. It requires constant replenishment through active participation. The moment the participation stops, for any reason, the flow stops with it. The daily decision that builds wealth is, at its core, a daily decision about whether you are doing something that builds structure or something that generates flow. Structure and flow are not the same thing. This distinction is where most financial confusion originates and where most financial education fails completely. A high salary is flow. It arrives, it departs. It must be regenerated. A rental property is structure. It produces cash flow independent of your daily participation. An equity stake in a business with operating systems is structure. An intellectual property asset, a distribution channel, a portfolio of dividend-producing instruments. These are structures. They produce without requiring your continuous presence as the condition of their production. The daily decision is the decision to allocate some portion of your available resources, time, capital, attention, toward building structure rather than exclusively generating flow. Flow pa. Use your bills today. Structure pays your bills while you are doing something else entirely. This is where Machiavelli's analysis becomes directly useful rather than merely historically interesting. He made a distinction in his writings on power between the ruler who maintains authority through continuous force and the ruler who maintains authority through position. The first type must be perpetually active. They must fight, threaten, maneuver, and apply pressure at all times, because the moment they stop, the authority dissolves. The second type has established a position so structurally sound that the cost of displacing them exceeds any realistic calculation of the benefit. They do not fight continuously, they hold. The financial equivalent is exact. The person who earns only through active labor must perpetually show up. The person who has built asset structures holds a position that produces whether they show up or not. One is force, the other is position. Force is exhausting, position is compounding. The daily decision maps directly onto this framework. Every day you are making a choice about which category you are reinforcing. Every hour allocated exclusively to income-generating activity, without any allocation toward asset construction, is a day spent adding to flow without building structure. Every dollar saved, but not deployed into a productive asset, is a dollar working against you through inflation rather than for you through compounding. Every skill developed without being converted into a proprietary position, a platform, a system, a product, or a distribution mechanism remains a skill rather than an asset. Skills are inputs, assets are outputs. The daily decision is whether today's inputs are being converted into tomorrow's outputs, or simply exchanged for today's compensation. The mechanics of this conversion are not complex. They require understanding three categories of asset that can be built through daily allocation decisions regardless of your starting capital or current income level. The first category is financial assets. Equity stakes in productive enterprises, real estate that generates cash flow above its carrying costs, instruments that distribute income independent of your active participation. The standard advice here is correct as far as it goes. Invest consistently, invest in productive assets. Allow compounding to operate over time. What the standard advice omits is the urgency of the timeline question. Every year you delay converting income into financial assets is a year of compounding you cannot recover. The person who begins at 25 and the person who begins at 35 are not 10 years apart in outcome. They are separated by the exponential difference that 10 years of compounding at the front end of the timeline creates. The second category is intellectual assets. These are systematized applications of your knowledge, experience, and perspective that generate value independent of the hours you exchange for them. A course that teaches what you know, a book that documents your framework, a methodology that others pay to access, a platform that distributes your insight to people who will pay for the clarity it creates in problems they cannot solve alone. The daily decision here is whether the insight you develop through your work is being captured and systematized or simply applied once and discarded. Most people apply their expertise daily and retain nothing transferable from it. The person building intellectual assets applies their expertise daily and simultaneously converts that expertise into a form that can be delivered at scale without requiring their presence for each delivery. Same input, fundamentally different output architecture. The third category is positional assets. These are the assets Machiavelli understood most clearly. The relationships, the reputation, the contextual trust, the accumulated credibility within a specific community or domain that creates a position no newcomer can occupy regardless of their skills or capital. Positional assets are built through consistent, visible, demonstrated behavior over time in a specific context. They cannot be purchased. They cannot be accelerated beyond the pace at which the community develops genuine trust in your reliability. But once established, they produce access, opportunity, and leverage that no credential or capital base can replicate. The daily decision in this category is whether your daily actions are being invested in a specific position or scattered across to 10 SES, a broad field. Depth in a specific context builds positional assets. Breadth across many contexts builds general credibility, which is worth significantly less. Before the construction of these assets can begin in any deliberate way, a diagnostic is required. The diagnostic is honest and uncomfortable for most people who have never performed it. It requires mapping where your current daily allocations are actually going, rather than where you believe they are going or intend them to go. Most people, when asked, will describe their daily habits in aspirational terms. They will say they are investing, building a business, developing skills. When the actual allocation of hours and dollars is examined without the filter of self-description, a different picture frequently emerges. The majority of available resources are going toward consumption, maintenance, and the generation of current income, the percentage going toward asset construction of any category is smaller than the person believes, and sometimes negligible. The diagnostic is not judgment, it is data. You cannot correct an allocation you have not accurately measured. The allocation does not need to be large to be structurally transformative. This is the part that contradicts the conventional framing of wealth building as an activity available only to those with substantial surplus capital. The compounding effect of asset construction is not primarily a function of the size of the initial allocation. It is a function of the consistency and the timeline. A person who allocates 2 hours per day toward building an intellectual asset and $100 per month toward acquiring financial assets, consistently, across a 10-year period, is not making a dramatic sacrifice. They are making a structural shift in what their daily decisions are building. The same person who allocates those same 2 hours to consuming content and spends that same $100 on depreciating goods will arrive at a completely different position 10 years later, without ever having made a decision that felt consequential in the moment it was made. This is the mechanism Machiavelli observed in The Governance of States and described as the difference between the prince who builds institutions and the prince who relies on personal authority alone. The prince who builds institutions creates something that outlasts any single decision, any single crisis, any single period of weakness. The institution operates when the prince is not present. The prince who relies only on personal authority must be perpetually present, perpetually forceful, perpetually performing. Remove the person, and the authority collapses entirely. Your financial architecture operates by the same logic. The person who builds asset structures creates something that operates without their continuous involvement. The person who builds asset structures creates something that operates without their continuous involvement. The person who builds only personal income requires their continuous involvement as the permanent condition of the income's existence. The daily decision is not made once. This is the critical feature of the framework that makes it both more achievable and more demanding than a single large decision would be. A single large decision, selling a house, making a major investment, launching a business, can be made with concentrated effort and extraordinary motivation. The daily decision cannot be sustained by motivation because motivation is a variable, not a constant. It fluctuates with circumstances, with energy levels, with competing priorities and emotional states. The daily decision must be built into the structure of your routine so that it executes on the days when motivation is absent. Motivation produces the initial insight. Systems produce the consistent execution. The person who understands what the daily decision is but relies on motivation to make it will make it sometimes. The person who has structured their environment so the decision executes automatically will make it always. Consider what systematic execution looks like in practice. An automatic monthly transfer to an investment account that purchases productive assets before any discretionary spending occurs. A blocked daily window of 2 hours protected from interruption for the construction of an intellectual asset. A platform, a distribution mechanism, a deliberate, consistent practice of showing up in a specific community with specific insight, building the contextual trust that creates positional advantage over time. None of these actions feel dramatic in the moment of execution. A monthly transfer does not feel like wealth building. 2 hours of writing or recording does not feel like asset construction. Showing up consistently in a community does not feel like building a moat. But the compounding logic of these small, systematic daily decisions across years is the mechanism by which every durable financial position is built. Not through a single transformative event, through the accumulated weight of consistent structural choices. The reason most people never make this shift is not lack of information. The information is widely available. The reason is that the daily decision that builds assets produces no immediate visible reward. The consumption decision produces immediate, tangible, sensory confirmation of value received. The asset construction decision produces nothing visible on the day it is made. The account balance is slightly higher. The document is slightly longer. The relationship is marginally deeper. None of these changes register as meaningful feedback in the moment. The human reward system is not calibrated for deferred, exponentially compounding outcomes. It is calibrated for immediate confirmation. This is the psychological structure of the problem, and it is why the same people who intellectually understand the importance of asset construction continue to make consumption decisions at the margin. Not because they are irrational, because the immediate feedback architecture of their environment is entirely on the side of the wrong decision. Machiavelli addressed this problem in his analysis of how princes maintain discipline within their states over time. He observed that the rules that feel most restrictive in the present are often the ones that preserve the most freedom in the future, and that the prince who relaxes those rules in response to short-term comfort consistently discovers that the long-term cost of the relaxation exceeds any short-term benefit. He was writing about governance. The application to personal financial architecture is direct. The constraint of allocating resources toward asset construction before consumption, the rule that executes before your preferences are consulted, is the constraint that preserves long-term financial freedom. Relaxing it in response to the discomfort of deferred gratification is the decision that compounds toward the wrong outcome, as surely as the right decision compounds toward the right one. There is also a compounding effect on the decision-making quality itself that is rarely discussed. The person who has been consistently building assets for 3 years has developed a different relationship to the question of allocation than the person who has not. They have seen the early evidence of compounding. They have experienced the structural difference between income from a position they hold and income from a day they worked. They have developed what might be called financial pattern recognition, the ability to look at an opportunity and immediately evaluate whether it builds structure or generates flow. This pattern recognition is itself a form of asset. It accelerates future decision-making in ways that cannot be quantified precisely but accumulate into a significant advantage over the person whose financial intuition was never developed through practice. The daily decision builds wealth. It also builds the capacity to see wealth-building opportunities that are invisible to someone who has not been practicing the decision. The urgency of beginning is not rhetorical. It is mathematical. Every day the asset construction begins later is a day of compounding that cannot be recovered. Not because the window closes, it does not close, but because compounding is front-loaded in its effects. The same allocation made at 20 produces more than the same allocation made at 30. Not proportionally more, but exponentially more, because the earlier allocation has a longer runway on which compounding can operate. The person who understands this and delays anyway is not irrational in the conventional sense. They are simply allowing the immediate feedback architecture of their environment to win a contest against the deferred reward logic of compounding. The solution is not stronger willpower. It is a restructured environment where the decision executes before the contest begins. The construction sequence matters as much as the decision itself. Begin with the financial asset allocation, because this category requires the least active time investment once the systematic structure is established. An automatic investment that transfers and deploys capital monthly requires perhaps 30 minutes of setup and periodic review. This frees the available daily time allocation for the second priority, which is intellectual asset construction. Begin with the asset closest to your current expertise, the knowledge you already possess that a specific audience would pay to access in a systematized form. Do not begin with the audience you wish you had. Begin with the problem you can already solve. The third priority, positional asset development, occurs naturally as a byproduct of consistent intellectual asset production in a specific domain. You do not need to engineer the positional assets separately. Show up consistently with genuine insight in a specific context, and the contextual trust capital accumulates as a structural consequence. The framework is not a promise of a specific financial outcome within a specific time frame. Anyone offering that is selling certainty they do not possess. What the framework offers is structural clarity about the category of activity that produces compounding wealth as opposed to the category of activity that produces only present income. The daily decision is the decision to allocate, systematically, some portion of every available day toward the first category. That decision, made consistently over 5 years, produces a structural position that the person who never made it cannot reach regardless of how hard they work inside the consumption and employment model. Not because the person who made the decision worked harder, because they were building something different with the same hours. Machiavelli's final observation on the subject of positional power is the one that applies most directly to this framework. He wrote that the foundations of every state, whether new, mixed, or hereditary, are good laws and good arms. but that good laws cannot exist where arms are wanting. So where good arms exist, good laws will follow. Replace laws with systems and arms with assets, and the principle transfers exactly. You cannot build a durable financial position on discipline alone. Discipline is the arm. The asset is the law. The discipline that executes the daily decision is what makes the asset construction possible. The asset, once constructed, is what makes the discipline's reward inevitable. The daily decision is available to you today, not the dramatic version, not the version that requires a significant capital event, or a perfect moment, or the resolution of your current financial constraints before it can begin. The version available today is the version that allocates the next available hour toward building something that will produce without requiring you, that directs the next available dollar toward a productive asset rather than a depreciating one, that commits the next available unit of attention to a specific domain rather than scattering it across everything competing for it. That decision, made today and repeated tomorrow and the day after that, is the mechanism. The compounding does the rest.